Okay. Hi, everyone. So, impermanent loss, stablecoin depeg, liquidations. What do these terms evoke to you? To me, there's a symptom of a big problem that we have in DeFi. We are unable to properly assess the performance and the risks of the primitive we use. This is a big problem because our goal is to onboard 1 billion people in the next bull market. And if we don't solve this problem, we're not going to be able to do so. So my name is Cyrille Pastour. I'm the co-founder of Swap, an AMM engineered for LPs. And today I'm going to present you how we made some research to better assess the performance and the risks of one of the largest primitives in DeFi, which is AMMs. So in this presentation, I'm first going to remind you of why it's key to study the performance and the risks of such primitive. Then I will share with you a framework to better understand what kind of methodology we can implement to better assess such metrics. And last but not least, I will share with you the learnings of our own simulator. So AMMs are one of the largest DeFi primitives. In fact, they were the largest up until last month, where they were overtaken by staking. So over 17 billion liquidity is locked into AMMs. In this talk, I'm going to assume that you know how an AMM works. So, I mean, just quick reminder, essentially there are two use cases: for traders to be able to trade on-chain, and for liquidity providers to benefit from the revenues of the market-making activity. Where AMMs are a huge innovation is that they solve some of the biggest problems arising with market-making in centralized finance. So the properties associated with AMMs encompass accessibility to anyone. It's from the point of view of the LP, you have access to market-making strategies, which in traditional finance are only for high-net-worth individuals and institutions. Second, they are transparent, which means anyone can assess their properties and how they work and how they behave. Which is key, of course, when you compare to centralized actors and all the black swan events we had over the past year, Three Arrows Capital, Alameda Research. All of these events are linked with an absence of transparency. Third, they are non-custodial, which means that you don't have to trust you don't have to trust anyone, and you can recover your funds at any time. And last but not least, they're interoperable with DeFi. So the main questions remain around the performances, which are quite uncertain due to the infamous impermanent loss. And we can see that it's really key to understand better those performances to see if AMMs are really like the silver bullets that we need to solve market making in our financial system. So this is what I'm going to deep dive on in the next few minutes. So first, maybe before diving into the actual results and how performant AMMs are and how risky they are, we need to better understand how to evaluate a financial primitive. So there are two main indicators that you need to consider if you want to evaluate a financial product: returns and risks. So returns is a very easy to assess indicator. And I think the industry is doing a poor job today at actually displaying which value people can extract when they deposit liquidity anywhere. So returns encompass, they should always be net. It's not about trading APY minus impermanent loss or whatever. Return is really straightforward. It's you deposit 1,000, what do you get at the end of the year? Is it 990? Is it 1,100? It's a very clear indicator. So yeah, and essentially, I believe that as an industry, we should make an effort to be much more transparent on this issue, and especially in the AMM space. Risk, on the other hand, is a bit more technical and hard to evaluate. So a first methodology to evaluate risk is to compute the variability of the returns. So suppose you have, for instance, a product that yields you a 5% APR, net APR, a product that yields it like on a consistent basis, so year 1, 5%, year 2, 5%, year 3, 5%, would be much less risky and much more desirable than a product which would yield the same return at different, with much more variability. Why is that? It's because eliminating risk enables you to plan. So for instance, if you know that you're going to get a 5% APY all the time, you know that you can, for instance, buy a house or whatever, take a mortgage. Also, it's much easier to use your capital in different instances when you have a less risky product because it's treated as a much better collateral, for instance. So that's also one of the reasons that you want a less risky product. Another way to assess risk is also to understand what happens in case of extreme scenarios. So for instance, there's another indicator which is frequently used in TradFi actually, which is called value at risk. So it's like, what are you going to lose in the most extreme scenarios? So that's another way to measure risk. The second question that you need to ask yourself when you want to assess the financial performance of a product is what benchmark are you using? Against what are you comparing the performance of the underlying primitive? So in the case of AMMs, in my opinion, we should use a HODL benchmark. So essentially, we should compare the performance of AMMs against someone who would just hold the tokens that are deposited in the pool. And last but not least, the question is, what kind of methodology should we use? So of course, realized data is probably the best way to understand if a product is working or not. Because, I mean, life just gives you like what happens, right? So the only issue with realized data is that out of the 1,000 potential like things that can happen in a market, you only get one. So it's not perfect to properly assess risks, notably. One example of that is UST. So for instance, if you had only used past realized data to understand how risky UST is, you would have thought, okay, it's a stable coin up until the day before it depegged. And that's why simulations are key, because simulations allow you to understand what can happen in a wide variety of scenarios. And so they are especially useful to understand risks. So the main drawback of a simulation, obviously, is that you cannot anticipate, like it's a closed environment, so if you haven't anticipated something that happens in real life, you will not modelize this phenomenon. So that's why you should always encompass both simulated data and realized data in order to properly assess the performance and risks of a primitive. So regarding to AMMs, we have some first indications around realized performance. So what we can see, several studies have shown that essentially LPing in uncorrelated asset pairs, so pairs like ETH-USDC, is actually not profitable for LPs. So there was a study done by Bancor which showed that 50% of LPs reported negative returns on UniV3. Then another study by a Twitter account, yeah, Twitter is often a really good source of information in DeFi, named Symmetor Capital, which essentially showed that the unrealized P&L of LPs on UniV3 on the 5 basis point ETH-USDC pool was below, was in the red by 100 million. So here we can see we have a first indication that realized performance are not good. And there comes our AMM simulator. So it's a tool that we built with researchers, mathematicians and market-making researchers, that allows us to test any AMM strategy in thousands of market conditions. So the way the tool works is that we have several parameters. We have a price trajectory. We have a trading demand, which is how many transactions, what size of the transactions, what is the price elasticity as well of the traders willing to trade. And we run AMM strategies on thousands of market conditions that are randomly attribute, like given. And this allows us to essentially test any AMM strategy and modelize its risks. So how do we compute the results? Essentially, in the end, we have a matrix with 2 dimensions. We have the returns, which is the average of the returns in each of the market conditions. And we have the risk, which is the variability of the returns. So from that, essentially, we can define like 2 zones. So first, we have like the kind of WAGMI zone. This is where you want to be, right? So with high returns and low variability of those returns. And then you have what I call like the gambling zone, which is actually the zone where you would see casino products, like the roulette casino game, with negative expected returns, but very high risk. So in other words, you have significant chances to win a lot of money, but even higher chances to lose a lot of money. And I have bad news. AMMs actually are gambling products. So what you can see here is the returns of different implementations of Uniswap v2 and Curve v2 on an ETH USDC pair. So as you can see, we have negative returns overall with super high risks. Then we tried to conduct some experiments to see how we could improve the model. So first, we ran a model which uses oracles as a base solution. So what we can see is that a very naive strategy based on so what we call a perfect oracle, which is an oracle with no delay, strongly outperforms AMMs. And then we tried to modelize our own solution, which is swap. So we have swap v1 and swap v2. So swap v1 is a solution that has been live for a year with a wrap BTC, wrap ETH, and USDC pair on Polygon. So it's a triple. And swap v2 has just been launched a week ago. So what you can see is that actually we found a model which is much more efficient and which allows us to strongly improve the returns of LPs on a risk-adjusted basis. So if we use realized data, we realize that so swap v1 has been live for a year, and if we use realized data, it's actually confirmed by what we see on the simulated outputs. So swap v1 had it's like a low risk, low return strategy. It has less than 0.1% in impermanent loss over a year with 1.3% net APR and 10x lower volatility than UniV2 Curve, for instance. And what's interesting is that if you look at the graph, so it's very coherent with the results that we found. And with swap v2, we should be able to up to 9x those returns by allowing more risk, essentially. Yeah, I think I'm running out of time. So maybe just one last thing to tell you. We're running a special offer for ECC. So essentially, if you flash this QR code and you deposit liquidity by end of next week, you'll be able to benefit from a boost on our token incentives. So if you want to try it out, just flash this QR code. Thank you. So I don't know if we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions.
So it seems like LP returns are sort of a zero-sum game. And so when somebody does well in the pool, somebody else does poor. So those are like the median, the middle mean points there. Do you have an idea of what the range are? Because we ran similar analysis and we saw that there was a huge, some people just lose truckloads and some people make truckloads.
So here it's much. I mean, I guess you're talking about more UniV3. So here it's around UniV2, because as you said, like on UniV3, different LPs have different behaviors. I would say that overall, like the overall PNL is negative. I would say also that UniV3 probably has some structural flows that mean that it's much harder to profit as an LP. And mainly there are 2 flows. The first one is that you have to use a constant product formula, even though you concentrate your liquidity as an LP on UniV3. And the constant product formula is not adapted to market making profitably and with low risks. And the second thing is, like, there's a reason why insider trading is forbidden. It's like you always lose when you're trading against someone who's more informed than you. And in the case of AMMs, the issue is that they are not even using public information. So they don't know what the price is on Binance. And essentially, LPs always get kind of front-run by arbitrageurs who know what the prices are. And so you start with so much structural disadvantage that first, if you're an uninformed LPs, for sure, in the long run, you're losing. And then if you're very sophisticated, maybe you can win, but probably this is not the most efficient way to do it. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. I think we're out of time. If you have any other questions, I'd be out, so don't hesitate to come and ask me more questions. Thank you.